Hello everybody. My name is Daniel Ware and I'm the genealogy librarian here at the Kentucky Historical Society. And today we are going to be talking about following your ancestors through records. Basically, I'm just going to go over different record types you may find in an institution like the Kentucky Historical Society or other libraries or groups that may hold records. And so this will be kind of going over a lot of the typical records, and I'll try to explain how you may be able to use them to help further your search and to help follow you through your ancestors' life, and how they might be able to help you solve puzzles in your research. So what we will do now is we will switch over to here. Actually, let me make sure that it's showing up on the Kentucky Ancestors Facebook page. Okay, good. It appears to be. That is good. Okie dokie. All right. So anyways, I am going to start the slideshow. Okay. All right, like I previously said, basically this is going to be learning about records that can help you follow your ancestors through records. So here's just a little introduction page. I'm going to mention how genealogy can be like a puzzle, but also how documents and records, when you are using them, can be puzzle solvers, I guess, in a sense. And so some different types of documents or records that you may find here at the Kentucky Historical Society or other institutions could be anything from maps and atlases, surname files, family histories, and books that are relating to that. There's also county-related books and materials. And I know here at the Kentucky Historical Society we do have a section in our open stacks that is alphabetized by county. And I'll kind of show a little picture and talk a little more about that when we get to it. And there's also microfilm, and there's also archival materials. And then other record types, some of the key ones would be birth records, death records, marriage records, I believe probate records such as wills and things like that, and we'll cover more in that section when we get to it. So like I previously mentioned, genealogy, it can be like a puzzle. There are different materials and records that can be a key to solving these puzzles, which I will be discussing. Institutions such as libraries, historical societies, and other places can have these materials and help kind of provide a key to unlock these mysteries and puzzles. And then several materials and records and services that are here at the Kentucky Historical Society can be of help. So for example, a lot more of what I will be showing in this will be examples from what we have here at KHS. So I'll go ahead and throw that out there if I haven't already. So maps and atlases. There are maps of different Kentucky counties. I know especially here at KHS, we don't necessarily have every map or atlas relating to every county, and the time frames can kind of shift around and things like that. So it can be hit or miss, but when you do find a map or an atlas for the county and the time frame that you're looking for, it can really be a lot of help. They can help you with boundaries, figuring out the boundaries of where your ancestor may have lived. They can help, depending on the time period and if they lived in a specific area where the county lines may have changed, you may be able to find them based off of different county maps for the different time periods and see where they may have moved to, or where the boundaries just changed around them. And it can also show you a lot of other different types of information too. I like to talk about, for example, I think it's in this next picture. Yes. So this, oh no, this isn't actually, I'm sorry. It's going to be the next one, but I got a little ahead of myself. Anyways, here's a couple of examples of what you will find when you are going to visit us here at the Kentucky Historical Society. We have a set of drawers that we keep. These are more copies because we do have original records or original maps in our archives, but these are more like mass produced and copies, and definitely materials that we aren't as worried about, them being fragile and things like that. So we do have these in folders, in drawers that you can easily access. I would suggest, if you did come in to KHS to look at these particular maps, I would go up to our reference desk and ask the reference desk about the maps, and they can either help you pull things or they can direct you as to what you would want to do. Because we do have on our computers, on our patron computers, we do have a spreadsheet index of where certain maps are and what drawers and what folders that they're in. Okay, this is actually what I thought I was about to talk about. So, so for example, a good example I really like to talk about anytime I do talk about things like this or maps or atlases is the Atlas of Henry and Shelby Counties, Kentucky from 1882, because they will show maps of the different districts that are in the counties, and they also include the homesteads, so you can, excuse me, if you do happen to know that your ancestor lived in Henry County in 1882, you can potentially find them listed on this little homestead map, basically, and see, oh, okay, they lived over here in this certain spot. What I also like about this particular item is it does include charts that do depict the number of acres, the person's occupation, the closest post office, where their original nativity is from, and the date that they originally settled in that specific spot. So that is really cool. I do like that. So you could look and, this is 1882 Atlas, and you may see that your ancestor had been living in that spot in Henry County since 1838. So that can kind of help give you some timetables as to where and when they may have been at a particular time. And so, yeah, it's very useful in pinpointing when and where your ancestor may have lived. You can glean information that could help with following migration. And it just can kind of help, especially even with, like I mentioned, the occupation part. You may see that they worked a particular job, or they were a farmer, or they were this or that, and that can help enrich their story a bit, I guess I like to say, because okay, well, this is what they did job-wise, and it kind of helps you understand what they did and who they were a little more. And here's the picture of an example of that's the cover, and then on the left and then on the right. I know it's kind of hard to see, unfortunately, with putting pictures in these PowerPoints. They're not always easy to see fine detail, but this is an example of the Newcastle precinct, and there are names of homesteads and other information on the map, so it can be useful to pinpoint and find names. Well, here's a little more detail. I forgot I did put this in. And you can see all the different names and all that kind of good stuff, and like a spring and other pieces of information, waterways, roads, sometimes will be on there, and certain landmarks, I guess you could say. And then here's a couple of pictures of the charts that I was talking about, and you can see names and all that kind of stuff, and see their occupation and where they're originally from and how many acres of land they had and how basically what year they settled in that specific spot. Um, so even like the acreage, land acreage, that could kind of give you an idea of how much land they had and how well off or how not well off they were in a sense. And then you may see, oh, they had such and such many acres, so then you may want to go look for a deed or a land record to see if and when they made any kind of sale on the land, and maybe get more detail that way. And then there's also surname files, which I have done a presentation on this already, but this is one of the go-to types of resources that we do point people towards, especially if they do visit us here at the Kentucky Historical Society. So these are basically donated materials since roughly about 1836-ish. I don't remember the exact date or year, but basically, yeah, it's just donated materials, and it could be different materials in each folder, and it's just kind of what we've just collected or been given over the years that seemed like it would be useful for patrons to use. I will also say that a lot of times when you are searching for surnames, especially certain surnames, they may have changed the spelling over the years, or one branch of that family may have changed the spelling of the last name, or it could be a phonetic thing with how people heard it and they wrote it down that way, so it kind of stuck, or to that, something like that. So you can also remember to look for the different spellings, because there are times where we do have certain surname files where we will have maybe a couple of different surname folders for basically the same surname, but because it was spelled differently, we have treated them kind of as separate entities, so they'll each get their own folder. But then also a lot of times I will see different spellings of a surname, but they'll be combined together into just one surname file. So you can also look for things like that, look for different versions. And then this is kind of just give you an idea of if you did come to visit us and you walked in, you could see basically when you walk in, kind of to your left are a bunch of filing cabinets. And then when they're just alphabetized by the last name, and then when you open it up to the picture on the right is basically how it'll look. And there could be multiples of a certain surname. And I will say that not everybody in a surname file is necessarily related to one another. So like in this example, there are, I think, the different Gibbs surname. So all of the ones in Gibbs folder 1, they may not all necessarily be related to each other, and they may not all necessarily be your Gibbs. Same goes for Gibbs 2. They may be completely different as well. So it doesn't hurt to double check any and all surname files relating to your families, just in case you may miss something if you don't. And there's also family histories / books, and those are a lot of times those are donated books that were written about certain families, usually by descendants of said family, and they can be useful if you're looking for a family and you don't know where to start, kind of like the surname files. And they can be good to look along with surname files, like I literally just said. And a lot of times they will have a lot of background information, and they can help you see where your family came from, the line of descendants, even where they may have migrated. I know on occasion I've looked at family history books when I've done research for people, and I can at least maybe get some names that then I can write down and remember and look in other records for those certain names. Or I'll see that a certain branch of this family moved or migrated to a certain county in Kentucky, or they moved to or from Kentucky, and then I can take that information and look through records relating to that other county or that other state and see if I can find those specific people and see if it matches up with what the book is saying. I will also say sometimes the way these family histories, especially the ones that we have here, they can differ on, I guess, how the information is presented. So you could have one family history book that is written basically like a novel or a nonfiction book, where it'll just be paragraphs of information, almost like written out like a story or a narrative. But then sometimes I've looked through family history books and they'll be more like just several charts or family pedigree charts and things like that, which they can still be useful too, especially if they do have plenty of dates and names and information that you can then follow up with searching through other records for. So that's always a great possibility. And then here's kind of, if you did come to KHS, here's a picture of what they look like on our shelves. They kind of come in all shapes and sizes. They can be more like newsletters. We get a lot of like family related newsletters. They could be more, I don't know, self-made is not the right word, but they could be basically more simply put together. They could have spiral binding. They could be like, completely official looking books that you look like you might find at a bookstore and things like that. So they kind of come in all shapes and sizes, and I guess it just kind of depends on, you're just getting the information out there, and a lot of times that's the most important thing. But yeah, they can kind of look all sorts of different ways, but a lot of times they usually all have pretty good information, and they can at the very least help point you in certain directions. And you may learn something, a little tidbit about your ancestor that you didn't know about, and especially some of these that were written more almost like story wise, and it kind of make your family, your ancestors feel more alive than it's just being like statistics or facts or things like that. So depending on how it's written and things like that, you could possibly get a little more out of what than what just the information is saying, I guess. And then you can look for county related records and documents. And I know here at the Kentucky Historical Society, we do have a section in our open stacks, and we will have books and materials relating to all 120 counties of Kentucky. Unfortunately, not all counties are created equal. We do have certain counties where we may just have a shelf or half a shelf, or we may have like 4 or 5 shelves. And a lot of them are relating to records or indexes or transcriptions of records that are pretty easy to just pull off the shelf and look at real quick. So a lot of times I'll even, if I'm researching somebody, I may, if I don't feel like getting out all the microfilm and getting that all set up, if I want to just quickly look through an index, a transcribed index, just to see if that person did get recorded in that certain record in that certain county, I can just quickly get to it and look and see. And then if they're there, then I'm like, okay, I know then there should be an original record then, and I can go look on microfilm or wherever and find that said record. So a lot of times, even like the transcriptions and book copies of records can be useful to kind of get your foot in the door and know if you're going the right way or not. Also, a lot of times there can be books relating to the counties, like their specialty or their main export. I can't remember off the top of my head which county it is. I remember seeing a book or two about it in our county section, but it was a book about their production of salt. And so, sometimes, you may find things like that. Whether or not those kind of books are that useful to you in your particular research, can, could be or may not be. But, they're there, and you may learn something more, at the very least, about the community or the county that your ancestor lived in, and kind of get a better idea of the world that they lived in, potentially. You also may find histories on that county or that town or community as well, which could also include biographical sketches. We do have them in certain counties, and so you may find, if your ancestor was doing things in the community and was fairly well known, somebody may have written a little biographical sketch about them. And, once again, just learning about the community and the county can kind of help enrich your understanding of your ancestor, and you can understand, the world they lived in and who they interacted with and what were the big issues of the day, what were the big things of business and economics, things like that. So all of these things can be very useful. And then here's a picture, and kind of like the family histories, the books in the county section are kind of the same way. They kind of come in all different shapes and sizes. So it's always good to look through and, check the spine to see if that's what you're looking for. And, a lot of these books you can flip to the back to see in the index to see if your ancestor happens to be in said book. And then you can then look for the original record based off of, hopefully finding them in one of these types of books. Let's see, okay, I'd take a quick moment to remind anybody who may be just joining us or has forgotten that, my name is Daniel Ware. I am the genealogy librarian here at the Kentucky Historical Society, and I'm basically just going over different records that you may find either here at the Kentucky Historical Society or at other institutions that can help you learn more about your ancestor and help you follow them through their journey of life and all that kind of good stuff. So I do appreciate you all being here, and we will continue with microfilm. So do have copies of most records on microfilm. There's a lot of other types of records too, censuses. We do have some newspapers. I will stress that some, because we do get people that do ask us about newspapers, and depending on the county and the time period, it can be very hit or miss. But we do have some, and doesn't hurt to ask if you do visit us. And there's also tax lists, and then there are vital records, which were between 1852 and 1911. I'm pretty sure I've talked bits and pieces about these in previous presentations, and I will kind of go over them in a moment. And there's also special papers, which those are very specific papers relating to an individual who may have been writing on a certain historic or genealogical topic. It could be a collection of genealogical information that's been collected. That section is a little more, it can be very specific and very hit or miss, because it's not going to necessarily have everything for everybody, if that makes any sense. And so it can be useful. Those types of documents on microfilm can be, but I'll be honest, I don't use them a whole lot, because what I'm chiefly looking for when I'm researching for people are like birth records, death records, marriage records, maybe a deed or a will, more of the straightforward types of records. So I'm not usually looking in like the special papers that often, but I do occasionally. We also do have city directories, which we also do have in the county section for certain counties as well, like the actual physical book forms. I have used those on occasion. So, any of these can also fill in some gaps in your family research. I know I have looked in newspapers for marriage announcements, birth announcements, death announcements, or obituaries, especially if I can't find a birth or a death record. I try to at least find some kind of an announcement in a newspaper, or or other types of records, maybe even church records, baptismal records when it comes to birth-related information. And so, yeah, all these different types of records can kind of help fill in gaps. Tax records may kind of help you pinpoint where an ancestor may have been at a particular time, may help you see, okay, this is what they had at that time as far as, the what they're being taxed on, I guess you could say, and things like that. So, and here's some pictures that kind of give you an idea of if you were going to go and look at microfilm here at the Kentucky Historical Society. The left-hand picture are where we store the microfilm, and basically in that section that I'm showing in that picture, that's going to be a lot of the specific county-related microfilm records, and they are typically alphabetically by the county. And so if you're going to be looking for vital statistic records on microfilm, or church records, or court records, anything that's going to be very specific to county-related records, will be in that particular section. There's another section, and that's kind of where you get more of the special papers and census records that are on microfilm, and other records that aren't necessarily specific to just like a county. The middle picture is an example of one of the rolls of microfilm, and in the box that they come in, and typically we try to have the microfilm number on it on the top. It'll be like MIC something, and then it'll be whatever the county related information, and then what the type of record is, and any kind of information that can be given, if it's an index, if there's no index, if it's got information on the side of the box. Usually they'll try to tell you that in that area. Or if there's things missing, they'll try to say, oh, well, book 5 is missing, or this index is missing. There is also, on this very far side, right-hand side, is a picture of basically the setup. There are three computer monitors, and they're connected to a little microfilm reader. And then basically you just put the microfilm into the reader, and you start up there's a program on the computer that lets you run the microfilm reader, and then basically you'll just look at it like you would kind of the older microfilm readers. I know some people are more used to them. And this is another situation where I would suggest, if you haven't ever used this type of microfilm reader, this kind of setup, I would just go up to our reference desk. And I know I use it all the time, so people always ask me all the time, and I'm more than happy to help people get them started and show them what buttons to hit, and all the different types of things you can do, like the zooming and the contrasting and the how to navigate on it and that kind of thing. So I would highly suggest, unless you've used it yourself a few times, I would probably just go up to our reference desk and ask for help on that. And then there are archival materials that you could look at. Now this would definitely be more if you did physically come here to look at these items. However, we do have a digital collection, which a lot of our archivists have over the years have tried to get a lot of things digitized so that you could actually look at it from the comfort of your own home. But unfortunately not everything is, just based off of their condition or manpower and all that kind of stuff. But some different things you can look at in either our archives or other archives that could help you with your research and learning more about your ancestor are there's could be manuscripts, could be letters. Letters are really great because you get a little slice of life, I guess you could say, of how your ancestor may have been living at a time. You might get dates, you might get names of other family that they may be writing to. They may be telling you about the goings and the goings ons that are going on in their time. So you get a better idea of, who was president, who was, doing all this stuff. Was there a war? So it gives you a lot of insight into their daily lives. It can. And then there are maps and atlases, as I previously mentioned. We do have older ones that we do keep in archives. There's also photographs that we do have. A lot of them are digitized, so you can potentially look on our website from home in our digital collection for those. There's also pamphlets, and there's also rare books, and sometimes there are some business records, and there are a lot of postcards as well, which I know several of them are digitized as well. And then many other things that, I can't necessarily go through in full detail at this time, but I would just, if there is anything you think could be of use to you in your research and you do decide to come here to research, I would just come up to the reference desk and ask about, certain materials and ask about the archives, and, we may be able to give you some specific examples of the different types of materials that are kept in there that may not necessarily be listed here. And, a lot of these materials, like a lot of the other records, can kind of help fill in gaps, when you're looking for more than just a birth record or a death record or a marriage record, and kind of give you a better understanding of how your ancestor lived. If they were in a business, maybe they're included in some kind of business record, and you may get a better understanding of the business that they ran, or how successful they were, or who they were interacting with, and things to that nature. So I would highly suggest, if you do stop by, to you can check with that. It can be hit or miss, most of these things, unfortunately, just because of what we've gotten over the years and all that kind of good stuff. So, and here's an example of an item, an image you might see if you were to look in our digital collection. This is from the Sawyer family scrapbook, and so there's several things like this where you can see pictures of photographs of different individuals and families, or landscapes, or buildings, and all of that kind of great stuff. Okay, now I'm going to now I'm going to go into more of the birth and death and marriage records and to those kind of records, the more of the bread and butter, I guess you could say. So there are birth records. Typically, those are going to run between 1852 and 1910. Mainly, especially what we will have here at KHS, will be in that time frame. Because unfortunately, before 1852, to the best of my knowledge, there weren't really any official birth records that were recorded in Kentucky. There may have been Bible records that people kept in their Bibles, or church records, or baptismal records, potentially. But it wasn't a county initiative, I guess you could say, until 1852, and then even then it basically would start and stop and start and stop, and they had a lot of difficulties, from what I understand, between 1852 and 1910, and I don't think there was a lot of cooperation between everybody involved, and there was just a lot of issues. So they would go from 1852 to 1862, and then they'd stop for so many years, and then they picked it back up again, and then also other issues, especially in the 1860s. There was the Civil War, so there weren't really any of these records being recorded, unfortunately, or there were natural disasters and fires and other things happening to the courthouses, so a lot of records over time were getting destroyed. So that's also another issue with finding birth records and other vital statistic records as well. Now, if your ancestor was born 1911 or later, you would need to check with the Office of Vital Statistics, which is in Frankfurt, because they're going to be the ones that are going to officially hold the vital statistic records once it became a national, statewide, official initiative in 1911. And it could still be hit or miss, even if there is a chance that we happen to have the right, if the county your ancestor was born in, if they did actually record births in the year that you're needing, it could still be very hit or miss, because I have had instances where everything lined up and then I look where that record is and I don't see that person's name there. So it could just be a matter of circumstance that they just didn't get recorded, unfortunately. They may have been living out in the country and were born there, and they didn't go to a hospital or go anywhere to get anything officially documented, potentially. Maybe, maybe not. So it can still be very hit or miss, even if everything seems to line up. And here's an example of a typical birth record that you would find between 1852 and 1910. Usually they're just birth records, and they're going to be more listed like a register or a ledger, and they'll list the name, if they're male or female, and the date of, or the location of birth, and the father's name and the mother's maiden name, and all that kind of good stuff. So if you can find this is great, because this is obviously what a lot of people, when they're researching, are trying to find things like this. So if you can find this fairly quickly, that can really help. And it can also give you names of the parents and other things relating to your ancestors, so then you'll know who their parents were, and you can potentially research those parents then, and kind of spread back further. And then there are marriage records, which, they once again fall into the vital statistics spiel. So typically it would be 1852 to 1910. However, marriage records are a little easier to work with, because there will be marriage records and bonds and certificates and registers that were recorded before 1852. So if you are looking for a marriage record, it can be a little bit easier, because there's a wider year frame that you can work with versus birth or death. Because if it is before 1852 for either of those types of records, it kind of hurts your chances a bit more. But marriage records, there's a little more opportunity, so they can be a little easier to work with at times. And here's an example of something you might find when you're looking for a marriage record. It can either be a bond, which is, I just talked about marriage records in my last presentation last month. I believe that one. It was a previous presentation that I did, but basically marriage bonds were usually either like the groom or the bride's father or brother or some other male figure that was associated with the marriage party. Basically, they put up a bond to basically ensure that the wedding was going to happen, and there's a surety. But you can find names, potentially a father's name or somebody's name who signed on. So if you can find those, and if neither of the married couple were above the age of, if they were underage, then there's a stronger chance that a mother or a father signed for one or both of them. So you can always keep a lookout for things like that. And then also, and sometimes there were just the marriage consent that a parent would just flat out say, I give permission for so and so to marry so and so, like my daughter to marry so and so, and things like that. So you may find that as well, and find names, especially of a father or a mother. And then there's death records. They're kind of like the others, where they fall mainly between 1852 and 1910. If it's before 1852, there's not going to be an official death record, but kind of like birth records, you may find something in a Bible record or a church record or like a burial record. There may be something, and I'll talk about this in a moment, but sometimes you may find useful information from a will, if you can find a will for said person, and then you can maybe still get the name of like children or parents or something like that. And once again, if it is 1911 or later, they will be officially at the Office of Vital Statistics. And we do here at the Kentucky Historical Society on microfilm, we do have death certificates between 1911 and roughly 1965. However, the only downside to those are you somehow have to magically already know the certificate number to find the certificate on the microfilm. So it's a very about way to, you're kind of in a stuck cycle, because the way they're broken up, they're divided by by a certificate number. So it'll be like 1931, certificate 1 through 3000. So there is an issue there. I have honestly, on one or two occasions, I've gotten lucky and found on, I think, maybe Family Search or somewhere, a digitized copy of a death certificate, and then I was able to find the certificate number from that, and then I went and found that certificate on microfilm. So yeah, there is that is, we do have that technically, but I don't use it very often, and it's not that useful because in order to use it, you would basically already know what you're trying to learn from the microfilm, so it kind of makes it a moot point almost. And here's an example of a death record that, especially you'll find on microfilm, just the regular death record between 1852 and 1910. And it's kind of like the birth and even the marriage records from this time. A lot of them will just be more like registers or lists or ledgers, but they'll provide names of who died, and sometimes they may include occupation information or their age, their condition, their place of birth. Sometimes they may include that, and date of death and all that kind of good stuff. So then you can take that information and help point you to look at other records and things like that, and also help you learn more about, oh, my ancestor was this age when they died, or they were this occupation at the time of their death, or they were living here at this time of death. Or sometimes certain death records, I know there are death censuses, and sometimes they'll also include what caused the death of your ancestor. So if you find something like that, that's also really useful, because you may find out that they died, from consumption or some kind of disease, or something very specific, and give you a little more information about your ancestor that way. And then there's probate records, specifically wills, and they can help you find parents or siblings or children of your ancestor. You may find your ancestor's inventory, and that'll kind of show you what they owned at the time, and kind of give you a better idea of how they lived and that kind of stuff. And there's also guardianship records, which if your ancestor was underage, then there's a strong chance that if one or both parents, particularly if the father and or the mother died, then they may have been put under somebody else's guardianship, and so you may find them through this type of record and see, oh, they got put under the guardianship of their uncle or some other person, and then you might be able to follow them better, especially if you're getting stuck trying to figure out where they went after their parents died, or something to that effect. So here's a couple of examples for wills, and I look at wills a lot because they will tell me, potentially they'll tell me the names of parents or the names of heirs or children, and give me important information that I can then use to follow up on. So looking through a will, you may learn more about your ancestor and how they lived and who they were passing on their materials to, and learn, oh, hey, this heir, I've never seen that name before, and then you may want to research that and help better understand the connections that your ancestor may have had. Okay, that will just about do it. Here is my contact information. Like I previously mentioned, my name is Daniel Ware. I'm the genealogy librarian. That's my email, and then also that is my work office phone number. And if you ever do, after this video / stream is over, you do have questions about any of this or other questions about genealogy, feel free to contact me, either of those options, and I would be more than happy to try to answer your questions to the best of my ability. And I think, let's see if we've got any comments or anything. Couple of comments. Okay, let's see what we've got here. Okay. As far as the slideshow, I can email people my slideshow. That is probably the best option. So I'll put up my contact information in a moment, and that way you can record it, or it'll be in this video so you can pause it. But basically, if you want to email me about that, and then I can always email you the presentation. I don't mind sharing that or sending that to people. That's the best way I know how to do it. So I can do that. If visiting from out of state, is there an online index of what atlases are available? Most of what we have here should be on our just in our library catalog. There are a few special rolls of microfilm that aren't cataloged at this time, but most of just books and normal materials should be. I know we do have, I was going to originally bring this up in this presentation, and I ended up not, but we do actually have like we do have sections relating to other states. I don't recall seeing anything specifically with atlases in those sections, but we do have like where it'll break down to certain counties within other states, and it will also include like different records that are in book format and things like that. Now we do have we have a section near where our microfilm readers are, and that's where we do have some physical books relating to atlases from different counties. Now, I don't recall seeing a lot as far as other states when it comes to like those types of things, because I think we do have some map atlases relating to other states, but they may be a bit more modern for some reason. We've got, but like a lot of like older ones, I don't recall seeing. But if you go to, actually, let me see if I can find. Yeah, basically, if you go to our website, which is history.ky.gov, and I'll share this back. So basically, if you go to, let's see, there's an Explore tab right here, and then under Catalog and Research Tools, that'll take you to this page. And this is also where our digital collections are that I was mentioning earlier. So if you did want to see if there was anything digitized, it's here. And basically what you'll do is you'll go to here and click on this button, and it'll take you to this, and you can find like resources and finding aids, graphic materials like photographs, maps and atlases. There is that. So actually I'm kind of glad I came across this. So now it may be more relating to Kentucky, but there could be something from other states relating to that if we have gotten that over the years. You can also up here in this upper corner advanced search type in something specific like a certain place or a name, and it may bring something up. And then also what I was originally going to show you is our library catalog. And if you go there, and I would type in anything you want to look up that we would have, I would look here under search by title, and then you can just type in like maps or a certain state, and it'll basically bring up what we have in our collection. Now basically what this can do for you when you're looking on your computer is it'll just kind of tell you like if we have it or we don't have it. It doesn't go necessarily into a lot of details, but basically if we have it, and especially if it's in just our normal library collection, it should be cataloged. So if we have it, it should be here. Let's see. Our business hours. Our business hours, the library specifically is open Wednesdays through Saturdays from 10 to 5. And so, yeah, basically you just show up and you would pay like an $8 admission fee to get into the whole building, the museum and everything. And then you just come upstairs. We're on the second floor. We're the Martin F. Schmidt Research Library. And if it's your first time, we'll probably have you sign up for a library card and all that kind of good stuff. But then, yeah, basically as long as it's Wednesday through Saturday between 10 and 5, you're good. We're open and available. Let's see. Okay, I think that will be about it. Let me bring back up my my information. And so yeah, I'm gonna leave it here just so that way this is the last thing you see on this video and it's available. And I think that will be about it. I feel like I answered the questions that did pop up. And like I said, if you do have further questions after this, I would highly suggest just emailing me or calling me, because I may or may not get back to reading through the comments right away, and especially if it's something dire. Okay. So you can only visit in person on Mondays or Tuesdays. That's your only day available. The only days available. I'm guessing that's what you're meaning. Okay. I, the only other option I could really see would be, because we do have research request options for people that cannot physically come here, and I'll show you that just so you see it, and it can be an option for you. Um, so back here on our website, back to the Explore tab, there is under it, there's Library Research Services. If you click on that, that's going to take you to our Library Research Services page. And basically, we've got a couple of main options as far as we could research for you. Now, the only thing is there would be a research fee tied to that. But there's a single record request, which is basically we would just search for one record for an ancestor. Like if you're just looking for a birth record for your great-grandfather, and that's all you're asking for, that would be a single record request. Now that would be $21.20, which can be mailed in with the form. And also there is a research request. That is where we would do an hourly per hour research on like multiple things. I tell people about research fees, and sometimes they're like, oh, okay, and I try to tell people ahead of time because I don't want to give people heart attacks or anything. So, so now the research request, it would be for KHS members, it is $47.70 per hour. Or if you're not a member, it would be $53 per hour. So basically, then the way that would work is I would either, you just send in $53 with the research request, and I would take it up to an hour to research, and then hopefully I find something, and then I would send that back to you, or at least give you some suggestions on other places that you may be able to check. And then if it did have to go past that hour, it would have to be an additional $53. But basically, I don't think I fully explained that level all the way. So basically, the research request would be searching for like multiple records, and it'd be like a really deep dive kind of thing. So you'd be like searching for more things and that kind of thing. So those are the main two things, and those would be options. And you would just mail to our address, which is just the 100 West Broadway in Frankfort, Kentucky. So anyways, I believe I've actually maybe gone a little bit over, so I will probably be cutting it off now. And like I said, anybody that does have questions after this point, if you want to just email me or call me, and I can answer your questions in more detail probably than I am able to at this moment. I do thank you all for joining me today, and the next program will be the second Saturday of August, which I believe is August 9th, I think. And so I will be having a guest speaker for that one. That will be Ashley Spinneberg Perkins, who is she's our America 250 Kentucky. She heads that whole initiative and program that we're going to be doing for the celebration of the Constitution and Kentucky and all that kind of stuff. So she'll talk more about some of that kind of stuff then. So anyways, thank you all for joining me, and I look forward to seeing you all next month. Thank you, and you all have well, let me bring it back up, actually. There we go. Thank you all, and you all have a great day. Bye-bye.